The Gili Islands are an archipelago of 3 small islands, Gili Trawangan, Gili Meno and Gili, just off the northwest coast of Lombok, Indonesia. The islands are a popular destination for tourists looking for a remote island experience. Each island has several small resorts, usually consisting of a collection of huts for tourists, a small pool and restaurant. Most local inhabitants live on Trawangan in a township stretching along its east side just inland. Automobiles and motorized traffic is prohibited on the islands by local ordinance, so the preferred method of transportation is by foot and bicycle or the horse-drawn carriage called a sidomo. Diving in and around the Gilis is also popular due to the abundance of marine life and attractive coral formations. Etymology: the name Gili Islands is a misnomer, because Gili simply means small island in Sasak. As a result, most of the islands around the coast of Lombok have Gili in the names, although confusion is averted by referring to the other Gilis around the Lombok coast by the proper names only. The Indonesian word for water is air, and Gili was named for being the only island of the 3 to have subterranean fresh water. This is acknowledged as a finite resource, with some resorts and restaurants shipping in the water from the mainland. Geography and climate: the islands are located in the Lombok Strait, to the immediate northwest of Lombok. They extend outward from a tiny peninsula called Saya near to the village of Tanjung on Lombok. Bali lies about 35 kilometers to the west of Gili Trawangan, the island's most westerly member. Both Bali and Lombok are easily visible from the Gilis in clear weather. Mount Rinjani, Indonesia's second highest volcano, is close by on neighboring Lombok and dominates the views towards the east. Due to the close proximity to the equator, the islands have a warm, tropical climate with a dry and wet season, with Mount Rinjani to the immediate east on Lombok, and Mount Agung to the west on Bali. The Gilis are somewhat sheltered and actually enjoy a slightly drier microclimate when compared to the surrounding archipelago. Dry season usually lasts from May until October, with monsoon season starting in November and continuing through to April. Temperatures range between 22 degrees Celsius to 34 degrees Celsius, with an average annual temperature of around 28 degrees Celsius. Demography: although specific census records for the Gili Islands alone are not available, according to the annual written register of Kepala Desa Gili and Mr. H. Taufik, Gili has 450 families, Gili Meno 172, and Gili Trawangan 361. This puts the number of registered resident Indonesian families on the islands at 983 as of 2012. The significant number of permanent Western residents is difficult to quantify, as there are no official statistics to date. History: due to the small size, population and relatively recent settlement of the islands, published sources are limited. Where local knowledge has been used, those cited are elected local officials whose details are listed in the references section. For more detailed regional historical information, visit the Lombok article. For a brief period during the Second World War, occupying Japanese forces used the islands as a lookout post and prisoner of war camp. Relics from this period include the remains of a bunker on the hill of Gili Trawangan and the wreck of a patrol boat submerged at a depth of 45 meters in the bay to the south of Gili. Permanent settlement only began in the 1970s, mainly due to the lack of fresh water sources before that time. Previous to human settlement, these islands remained pristine wildlife mangrove habitats. Initially, Bugis fishermen used the islands as a stop-off location for the voyages around the archipelago. In 1971, the governor of Lombok, Warsita Kusama, began to establish coconut plantations census and gave land rights to private companies. 350 inmates from overcrowded Mataram prison were sent to help with the first harvests between 1974 and 1979, many of whom remained on the islands as permanent settlers. Following various difficulties with coconut harvests, the private efforts to exploit the island's plantations were abandoned. The local population grew beyond their allocated bounds and began to erect homes and businesses on the private, abandoned land. This led to a land dispute that continues to the present. In the 1980s, the islands started to be discovered by backpacker tourists. This was influenced by the exponential rise of tourism in neighboring Bali. At first, Gili began to transform to cater to this new economy. However, Gili Trawangan soon surpassed it due mostly to its proximity to better dive locations. As the prospects for tourism on the islands began to rise in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the government and investors whose abandoned land had been settled on by an expanding population began to regain interest in the potential for development. This resulted in a series of evictions and demolishing of local homes and businesses, followed each time by no action on the part of the developers and a rebuilding of destroyed homes by residents who opposed the eviction. The first tourist accommodation on Gili Trawangan was a small homestay called Pak Majid, built in 1982 by Pak Majid. This was eventually taken over in 2007 and transformed into Pesona Resort and Restaurant. Most of the locally owned businesses from the 1980s have been acquired by Westerners. The longest-standing locally owned and operated business is Goodheart Resort, originally built in 1987 and rebuilt 3 times following demolition relating to the ongoing land dispute. Gili Trawangan gained a reputation from the late 1980s to the late 1990s as a party island. Drugs were freely available on the island, and its low population and remoteness required no police presence at the time. During the 1990s, the diving industry grew swiftly and the islands began to develop into a world-class diving instruction location. This fed local tourism, and in the new millennium a wider spectrum of accommodation and entertainment began to be developed that catered to a broader range of visitors. In 2000, a non-profit organization by the name of Gili Eco Trust was established to help protect the coral reefs surrounding the islands and improve environmental education. It originated as a cooperation between influential members of the local community and the dive shops on Gili Trawangan and was initiated by the owners of Manta Dive. Many projects have since been organized to protect and restore coral reefs, improve waste management, struggle against erosion, treat animals, raise awareness and educate. This was needed as damage had occurred due to a particularly warm El Niño and unsustainable local fishing methods. In 2005, fast boat operations began from neighboring Bali, the first company being Blue Water Express. They still operate to the islands. Following them, fast boat services from several operators commenced services from various points around Bali and Nusa Lembongan to the islands. As of 2012, the islands continue to experience rapid growth and development related to the tourism industry. Efforts are being made to preserve marine habitats and remain culturally distinct from neighboring Bali in this process. The aforementioned land dispute remains unresolved. Gili Trawangan. Gili Trawangan is the largest of Lombok's Gili Islands and the only one to rise significantly above sea level. Measuring 3 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, it has a population of around 1,500. The name Trawangan originates from the Indonesian word Terawangan due to the presence of a cave tunnel built there during Japanese occupation in World War II. Of the Gilis, Trawangan is the most developed and geared towards tourism. The main concentration of settlement, recreation, accommodation and diving business is situated on the eastern side of the island. A local pub, Tir Nanog, claims that Trawangan is the smallest island in the world with an Irish pub. It was previously administered under Lombok Barat Regency along with Senggigi until 2010, when the Gili Islands came under the jurisdiction of the new North Lombok Regency. On Gili Trawangan, there are no motorized vehicles. The main means of transportation are bicycles and sidomo. For traveling to and from each of the Gilis, locals usually use motorized boats and speedboats. Some of the first inhabitants of Gili Trawangan were fishermen and farmers from Sulawesi. Previous to human settlement, Gili Trawangan was covered in forest and deer lived on the island. The economy of Gili Trawangan centers on tourism, as the island is too small to support any broad-scale agriculture, and too remote to allow economically viable industry or commerce. There is a mosque on the island. Drug tourism. Gili Trawangan has had a reputation since the 1980s as a location where drugs are freely available. Psilocybin mushrooms are openly advertised on the island, and a range of harder drugs have been known to be in circulation, though police presence is low. Indonesian drug laws are extremely harsh, and thus, strictly speaking, drug possession and use is prohibited and carries potentially grave risk. In recent years, locally made spirits have caused casualties and even some fatalities among tourists and locals due to methanol poisoning. Methanol is sometimes used by locals as a cheap way of topping up the stock. The most recent case of this was on New Year's Eve 2012, where a young man was served a cocktail at Rudy's bar that had been infused with methanol. Following misdiagnoses in Indonesia and repatriation, he died 5 days later. Gili Meno. Gili Meno is the middle of Lombok's 3 northwest coast gilis. Gili Meno has a population of about 500, mainly concentrated on the center of the island. The main income comes from tourism, coconut plantation and fishing. On the west side of the island there is a small shallow lake that produces salt in the dry season. Until a few years ago there was also a small production of seaweed on the reef at the north end of the island. Gili Meno has swimming beaches all around the island, and a turtle sanctuary. The island attracts fewer tourists than Gili Trawangan and is the quietest and smallest of the islands. However, honeymooners are often drawn to the crystal clear water and idyllic, secluded white beaches. There is no fresh water on the island, and it has to be brought by boat from Lombok. Electricity is supplied by underwater cables from Lombok. There are no cars or motorbikes. Gili Air. Gili Air is the second smallest of the islands and the closest to mainland Lombok, making it popular with honeymoon couples and travelers seeking a quiet retreat. It has a population of about 1,800. The island offers excellent snorkeling and scuba diving off its east coast, and turtles can be seen along the coral reef. Other water sports such as stand-up paddleboarding and kite surfing are also now available. An Indonesian cooking school has opened its door on the harbour in 2015. Gili cooking classes. Continued investment in tourism is seeing these islands develop very quickly, and each year sees new resorts and accommodation on the islands while attempting to retain their individual character. Proximity to Gili Meno, the smallest and most secluded of the islands, and to Gili Trawangan, the largest island, known for its many restaurants and parties, makes Gili a happy medium of seclusion with adequate services. Both other islands are a quick boat ride away. Transport. There is no motorized transport on the islands. The short distances on land are traversed on foot, by bicycle or sidomo. The islands can only be reached by sea, and are frequented by a variety of fast boats operating various routes from Bali. Flights from Ngurah International Airport to Lombok International Airport take about 40 minutes, followed by a 2 hours taxi ride to Bangsal Harbour in northwest Lombok and a local boat to the Gili Islands for a further 20 to 30 minutes. Public ferries depart from Padang by every hour, taking a minimum of 4 to 5 hours to reach Lembah, after which a taxi can be taken for a 2 hours drive to Bangsal Harbour, where local boats to the Gili Islands await during daylight hours. There are now numerous direct fast boat services from Bali and speedboat from Lombok to the Gili Islands, all of which also service Lombok, and a few of which pass by Nusa Lembongan en route. Prices and standards vary widely both online and locally, depending on departure point, level of comfort and operating expertise. Established daily services depart from Benoa and Serangan in South Bali and from Padang Bai and Amid in East and Northeast Bali respectively. Benoa Harbour and Serangan are around 25 minutes by car from Kuta and the main South Bali tourist hub. Padang Bai is about another hour by road from the same point of reference. In 2011, the Gili Bookings website made first provision for online e-ticketing for the fast boat sector. Detailed travel information can be found in the Gili Islands Wiki Voyage article. Gallery.